Existe el problema de la cantidad de automóviles en las ciudades y se quiere evitarlos usando otros medios de locomoción. Bueno, uno de esos medios son las bicicletas. Yo soy Gilberto Aceves Navarro, pintor, grabador, escultor. El principio de las bicicletas fue así. Mi interés en relacionar a las familias con el medio ambiente. El obrero trabaja en sitios cerrados, muy poco humanos. Entonces mi interés era dotarlos de esa relación humana con el medio ambiente. ¿Cómo represento formalmente todo esto? Encontrando que puedo hacer bicicletas que se parezcan, que sean retratos, que no sean retratos, que no se parezcan, pero que puedan darme la idea de qué es esto. Son vehículos que yo llamaría de alegría, de salud. Es una forma que me da tranquilidad porque no tiene picos de ninguna naturaleza. Es más bien una pieza plana. Sale de una hoja de metal y entonces viene la gran máquina láser que va recortando la pieza por donde dibujé. Ya que está todo esto soldado que se puede parar y mover y demás, la pule uno y una vez hecho eso se le pone una cubierta que va a permitir pintarla. Negro, rojo, blanco y amarillo. Esos son los 4 colores que se usaron. Ya ahorita a la edad que tengo ya me cuesta mucho trabajo hacer esfuerzos físicos como para andar 14 horas en bicicleta, pero sí puedo hacer lo que estoy haciendo, pensando cómo pueden las bicicletas ayudarnos a existir mejor.
So, good evening and welcome to the 2015 National Bike Summit. My name's Andy Clark, and I'm president of the League of American Bicyclists. Thank you all very much for being here. It really means a lot to have you all here, and your presence here in Washington will mean a lot to people up on the Hill on Thursday. So thank you for being here. Thank you to all our sponsors for their support to make the event possible. The video you just saw, I wanted to start with that for a couple of reasons. First, it's an awesome piece of sculpture, and there are 83 of those bikes in the plaza where we used to have the National Bike Summit outside the Ronald Reagan building, at the Moynihan building. So if you want to take time off, not tomorrow because the sessions are outstanding, but perhaps on Thursday to go and see those. If you've got time between meetings, you should do that. And the bike ride on Friday will go past the location, and you'll be able to see them. But we wanted to show it because not only will you get to see the delightful summery weather we've laid on for the summit this year, in contrast to last year, but it's a captivating thing, and there's a great story behind them. The story behind that sculpture, if you could see the subtitles or hear the text, was a good reason for me. As I watched it for the first time, I realized the artist perfectly captures the theme of this year's summit. Bikes plus. Bikes add value. Bikes solve problems, especially for the artist related to health and the environment, and in the areas of community and economic development. For many of us, bicycling is a good for its own sake. It makes us happy. It gets us from A to B with a smile on our faces and a clear head at the end of it. We get it. Unfortunately, it turns out we're still in something of a minority, and not everyone is motivated the same way we are by bicycling. They have, if you can believe it, other interests and priorities. Now, those of you who've been to the summit before, the last two in particular, you'll know that we've learned a lot about how bicycling and bicyclists and our issues are perceived by others, especially by elected officials. And we've tailored our messaging accordingly. Hopefully, we have been listening and learning as we go. 2 years ago, we literally tore up our fact sheets and issue papers a week before the summit because we discovered that our message, a fair share for safety, wasn't going to work. It sent the wrong message, and that we needed to change it, and we did. Instead, we asked for a non-motorized safety performance measure, which admittedly doesn't have quite the same cachet and is not quite the same slogan. But thanks to your presence here and your meetings last year and the year before, thanks to 10,000 people who were sufficiently motivated to actually write to the Federal Register about a safety performance measure, we're going to get that performance measure later this year. Now, for us, there can only be one ultimate performance measure or goal: 0 traffic fatalities. Note, not 0 bike fatalities, 0 traffic fatalities. That is the essence and magic of Vision Zero that you can learn more about tomorrow afternoon. If we can make our roads that safe for bicycling and walking, then everyone wins. Bicycling and walking doesn't get safer just by focusing on bicyclists and pedestrians. It gets safer by focusing on speed, on distracted driving, on enforcement. That's bicycling solving bigger problems. That's Bikes Plus. Now, for an enthusiast group like the League, making the shift from seeing the bike as an end in itself to embracing the bike as a means to many ends is a big one. And it's not one that we've taken lightly. I want to acknowledge the League's board of directors for their leadership and courage as we've made this shift. League board members, stand up and identify yourselves. And in particular, I want to recognize our new board chair, Karen Jenkins. Up on your feet one more time, Karen. And thank you also to the awesome League staff that I get to work with every day who are hopefully doing so much, I know they are, to make your stay here a worthwhile experience. I actually got a letter. This is going to sound like the State of the Union, but she's not here, so she's not sitting next to Tim as a special honor. I actually got a letter from a former board member who was on our board in the 80s last week. Anita Brewer from the Boston area says, "I've been a League member since before the 1980 centennial of the League in Newport. The current issue of the magazine," she writes, "is a sea change for the magazine and for the group. There are a lot of articles that generated reflection and ideas. I read everything." She goes on, "For decades, I've noticed an elitist streak in organized bicycling and thought this must be why it never seemed to step into bigger shoes. Perhaps if the League can look at how bikes will partner to change the world, not only how we can get more people on bikes per se, the group will grow. For the group as a whole," she writes, "do you think the League can hold on to this larger vision without losing its base?" What an excellent question. The League has embarked on a journey, another journey over the past couple of years that's critically important, very exciting and not without its own challenges. Many of you know, a couple of years ago, we launched an equity initiative, thanks to the leadership of Alison Graves on our board, Carolyn Shapansky on staff, and Hamza Sani, our equity fellow of a couple of years ago. And we got a significant grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to begin the transformation of the League into a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive organization, into an organization capable of shaping our movement along those same principles. I want to acknowledge, as was done during the Women's Forum this afternoon, the members and the role played by the members of the Equity Advisory Council, and thank them for their commitment, their honesty, for sharing their perspectives, and for sure, always challenging us to do more, faster, and better. Members of the Equity Advisory Council, stand up and take a bow. Thank you for your help and guidance. And in that 2 years, the League has moved. The board has established an equity committee, one of 4 such committees that are part of the board. Our strategic plan has 4 key pillars, and one of those 4 is to build a board, staff, and network of affiliates and partners that represent and are connected to America's diverse communities. Our individual program areas are going through internal audits to assess their ability to generate equitable outcomes through more inclusive processes, engaging more diverse views and voices. We've produced a series of groundbreaking reports, conferences, and events on equity and gender issues. That's all well and good, but here's the challenge. Like right here. You're looking at it. A 55-year-old white guy who thinks he's in charge and doesn't want to let go. Now, in my defense, I'm only 53. I don't have a beard. I'm a first-generation immigrant, and my native language of English I know is still foreign to you. But I'm lucky to have one of the top jobs in bicycling in this country. And I recognize there aren't many like it out there. And I know Tim Blumenthal thinks the same about his job. Keith Laughlin at Rails to Trails, the same. Jeff Miller at the Alliance. Fred Clements at NBDA. Mike Van Abel at IMBA. We're all good guys. We love what we do and the people we get to work with every day. But there's not a lot of diversity there. And that's a challenge. A similar story can be told among the League's 900 local clubs and affiliates. Our League cycling instructors, the bicycle advisory committees that do so much to create more bike-friendly communities. There's a lot of extraordinary people putting in countless hours to organize rides, events, teach classes, run campaigns and programs, go to meetings, and there's not a lot of diversity in our ranks. It's growing and it's changing, but we've got a long way to go. What's the solution? What do I do? And what can the League do? Is there a find and replace key in the Woman Bike Toolkit? I hope not, because what we need is more as well as different people and voices. More organizations for people to head? I don't think that's working. What I hope I've learned over the last couple of years and will act upon is to share more decision-making and power with people that don't look and think like me, to establish the policies and practices that create a more diverse board, a more diverse and inclusive board and staff, to develop and nurture emerging leaders, and be an ally to those seeking change. I want to spend the next couple of years fostering and enabling that change in the League because I truly believe that the League and our affiliates and the broader movement must be more representative of the population, more diverse and more inclusive if we're to survive and be sustainable, relevant, and valuable, if we're to deliver on the promise of Bikes Plus. Can we, as Anita Brewer asked, hold on to that larger vision and not lose our base? That, to me, is the challenge and opportunity in front of us. What do you think? Can you hold on to that larger vision and not lose the base? We're not in a zero-sum game here. Look at the energy, excitement, the talent, and leadership we saw earlier today at the Women's Forum, and think about how that event and initiative has grown. Think how much those voices, that talent and energy is adding to the bicycling movement of old. Not replacing it, but strengthening and adding immensely to its relevance and strength and sustainability. And it's only just begun. Now, shifting gears slightly, because it seems kind of somber at the moment. Shifting gears slightly, one of our partners who over the years has done a lot to engage a younger demographic in the summit is Saris, and their Safe Routes to School poster contest winner. And I want to invite Sarah from Saris to the stage to introduce the 2014 poster contest winner, who we acknowledge in the summit the year immediately following. So Sarah, come on up.
Thank you, Andy, and good evening. Saris is really proud to be here as the sponsor of the National Poster Contest and to introduce the 2014 Poster Contest winner. In 2014, we had over 15,000 submissions. These are fifth grade students who create a piece of artwork. Last year's theme was the quote by John F. Kennedy, Nothing compares to the simple pleasure of a bike ride. 15,000 submissions in 32 states. And the program really does two things, I think, for our movement. Number one, it introduces youth to making the connection between themselves and the power of riding a bike. But number two, it creates the next generation of bike advocates. Over the past 4 years, we've had the winners who have come to Washington, D.C. and sat in meetings with their senators and congressmen and really made an impact that, as Andy said, we're not just one demographic, but we're really multi-generation here. So tonight and this week, we're really proud that we have another winner, our second winner from the great state of Mississippi. And so the winner will spend the next couple of days meeting with senators and congressmen and enjoying Washington, D.C. So please join me in welcoming and congratulating the 2014 poster contest winner, Lily Adam from Starkville, Mississippi. This is Lily's poster, and not only will we have it here, we also have postcards. These would be great leave-behinds as you make your visits over the next couple of days. So thank you, and congratulations, Lily.
Thank you very much. We value Saras's support of the summit and their commitment to advocacy, especially in Wisconsin. Another great Wisconsin company, Trek, continues to be a huge supporter of the League's bicycle-friendly community program, for which we're very grateful. Thanks also to People for Bikes and the National Bicycle Dealers Association for their summit sponsorship. You can see all the sponsors we want to thank up here, also from the bike industry, Primal, Performance, a wide range of people. We encourage you to visit their booths and look at their wares outside. We'll hear more from Tim tomorrow morning. I encourage you to check out one or more of the retailer sessions tomorrow to learn why the National Bicycle Dealers Association thinks, and I think we share this belief, that local bicycle retailers are an essential part of bicycle infrastructure. There are two new sponsors I want to give a quick shout out to that are both new strategic partners of the League, and I encourage you to visit their booths to learn about, first of all, bikelaw.com. Check their poster and postcards, and I think they're doing bike fix-ups or something. I saw them fixing bikes. They're injury lawyers, personal injury lawyers, so they should be a little cautious about what they're promising. But learn more about that network of lawyers that's defending cyclists. And then Spoke Insurance, which is a new product to protect your passion, your bike. You can get a quick quote from Craig Dawson at spokeinsurance.com. He's outside. Check out their new product, and we value their support and their help. And now I'm delighted to introduce you to Dr. Maya Rockymore. Dr. Rockymore leads Global Policy Solutions, a Washington, D.C.-based policy firm that makes policy work for people and their environments. Dr. Rockymore has served as an adjunct professor in the Women in Politics Institute at American University, has been the vice president of research and programs at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, senior resident scholar at the National Urban League, chief of staff to Congressman Charles Rangel from New York, professional staff on the House Ways and Means Committee, among many other positions. And among other things, I hope she's going to help us wrap our heads around and connect the idea of targeted universalism with advocacy of bicycling. Dr. Rockymore.
Hello, National Bike Summit. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to be before you this evening. Lily, I want to congratulate you on that fabulous bike. That was gorgeous. You did a great job. I see a big future ahead of you in the artistic world and certainly the bicycle advocacy world, so thank you so much. Actually, Andy gave my speech, so I'm just going to go home now. I'm done, but maybe not, because he did say he wasn't giving up his job, so maybe there's still opportunity to talk about some strategies that we can use for diversifying the movement. But that being said, let me just start with a brief kind of overview of where I'm coming from. I'd like to think that I lived in bicycle nirvana. In 1994, and actually I'm kind of dating myself a little bit, I had the opportunity to actually study abroad in the Netherlands. And so, this is exciting for me because it was my first time, like away from home, abroad overseas by myself. My parents were military, so I've traveled with my family, but never by myself abroad overseas. And so I land in Schiphol Airport, and I take the train straight to Leiden. I was going to the University of Leiden. And so I come out into this bright sunlight, and then all of a sudden I just realized that, I was getting all this gleaming off of my eyes, and then a line of bicycles just completely surrounding the train station. And I had never seen anything like it before in all of my travels across the United States of America. I was just amazed. Now, I didn't have a bicycle right away, and the place where I lived, the group home where I lived, was approximately about a mile away from the university. So and I was a very, 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 very poor graduate student. So it took me a while to save the money to get a secondhand, really crappy bike. But I got one after a couple of weeks. And literally, that bike was my salvation. I was going everywhere, to the grocery store, to the farmer's market, to school, to bars. I was doing everything on that bicycle. Not only was I doing everything on my transportation business on that bicycle, I was actually eating healthier over there. And so when I came home after 6 months abroad, my sister had to come get me from the airport, and she literally walked right past me. I said, Meredith. And she looked at me, and then she walked past me. She did not recognize me. I'd lost 50 pounds. And so with that, the promise of bicycling as transportation and recreation and certainly eating healthier has promise for the nation, and I come at that from the perspective of health. But I also come at it through the co-benefits, everything from, climate change prevention, mitigating climate change, the effects of climate change, to, actually reducing traffic congestion. All of the co-benefits of using bicycles are important. And so with that, I'd just like to say that I'm very pleased to be here. With that, we know that there are challenges happening in towns and cities across the United States as we seek to introduce cycling as a fundamental component of our multimodal transportation system. We're trying to think about, how do we actually build the infrastructure, the biking systems, certainly the curb cuts and everything that comes with as a part of that, as a part of what we're doing here in America, so that it becomes as ubiquitous as you see it in other countries, and certainly as I saw it in the Netherlands. But in cities across the United States, we're seeing this clash of cultures, right? And so questions are coming up. How is equity being defined? And if you do a quick search of transportation equity, you'll see transportation equity meaning, how do cyclists get more resources, and how does bike infrastructure get more resources as compared to automobile infrastructure? And that's called transportation equity. But there are other definitions and considerations and nuances in terms of transportation equity, in terms of, when you're laying out infrastructure, who's getting the infrastructure first? Here in DC, when they started laying out bike lanes, it was in the upper income neighborhoods that you started to see the infrastructure first. Who gets access and when? These are all questions. Who determines the priorities? Communities who have been biking and walking a very long time, by the way. who have always had a low carbon footprint because by necessity, because they don't own a car, have been, biking and walking. And so, to the extent that, folks who are very eager about transportation infrastructure and cycling come around and say, we want to make sure that you have some protected lanes, and everybody's like, can you get me a job? Who determines those priorities? Who is engaged? Why and on what terms? What is the desired outcome and for whom? When you're envisioning your ultimate objective, your ultimate goal, what is the population you see in your mind's eye? Does it include everyone? And so with that, we know the statistics. And this is from the National Household Travel Survey. It's showing that, as you go up the income scale, the share of adults who use the bicycle for recreational trips is higher at the higher income levels. And then the share of adults who use transportation by bike or who use bicycles for transportation is very high at the lowest income levels, showing you the necessity of these low-income populations, disproportionately people of color, for using bicycling and walking as their primary method of transportation. So you've got natural allies, right? They should be natural allies. These are natural allies. So what's the problem? Well, so here are some interesting statistics. Cycling is concentrated in central cities, especially near universities and in gentrified neighborhoods. So harken back to what I just said about how bicycling was rolled out here, infrastructure was rolled out here in the district. Similarly, in places across the country. In the United States, 24% of all bicycle trips are made by women. Isn't this an interesting disparity? And 76% are made by men. Almost all of the growth in cycling in the US has been among men between the ages of 25 to 64, while cycling rates have remained steady among women and have fallen sharply but for children. People are afraid to let their children bike. Children from however, again, speaking to necessity, children from low-income and minority households, particularly African Americans and Hispanics, are more likely to bike or walk to school than whites or higher-income students. So again, you see that necessity of using walking and biking as a primary mode of transport for low-income, primarily minority communities. Yet, there's some bright horizons in that bicycling is becoming more diverse, with rates rising fastest among African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans. These three groups account for a growing share of all bike trips. So, we have a diverse array of challenges that face us when it comes to biking in America. So what Andy was talking about earlier is very important. And I don't know how many of you have been following the controversy around the environmental movement in the United States and the lack of diversity there. Nobody. Wow. 1, 2 people, 3 people, 4, 5 people, 6 people, 7, 8. Okay, 8 people have been following this controversy. And so the paradox is that when you look at who's actually experiencing environmental hazards disproportionately, who's actually exposed to environmental hazards disproportionately, you see that communities of color, low-income communities are disproportionately affected. Yet when you look at the environmental movement, it is lily white. I mean, not just lily white in terms of board membership, not just lily white in terms of leadership. Literally, all staff is basically Caucasian. And so you have a disconnect between those who are disproportionately affected by some of the most critical challenges facing the environmental movement and those people who are actually populating the environmental movement infrastructure, if you will, organizational infrastructure. And so you get headlines like this: the environmental movement feeling the heat to diversity. And I think the first line of that reads, and that's not heat from climate change. But I found a couple of the questions that were posed in this article interesting. One woman says that the question for us is, who makes the decisions? People in communities that are most impacted by those decisions must not only lead on those issues, but they must also actively participate. Now, I can barely read. This is quite far, but I'm doing my best. Another quote in that article: diversifying the environmental movement is the central challenge of the movement and the central opportunity. We will never successfully tackle the economic challenges we face including climate change, without doing so. So, the question becomes, when you're talking about diversity, can we reach that vision that I asked you about in your mind's eye if we're not truly being inclusive and diverse? So, with that, I was asked to talk about targeted universalism. Now, I want to talk about targeted universalism from two perspectives. One is from policy design, and another one is from practice, advocacy practice. And so traditionally, when you're talking about designing public policies, you have the concept of universal policies, policies that actually apply to everybody across the board regardless. And your universal might be a city, your universal might be a nation. It depends on what your jurisdiction is and how you're actually defining universal. And so, with that, universal policies tend to have higher costs because they impact everybody. Their impact is broad. And certainly there's more public support because everybody is participating and there's less stigma. And it reaches more people because you're actually you're seeking to have a broad reach. And then you have targeted policies. And those targeted policies are really just focused on particular specific groups. You have less support for those kinds of policies because, usually people are saying, well, why are they getting this and we're not? And there's more stigma associated because, you can actually see who's getting something. And then, there could potentially be less cost depending on how it's designed and a more limited and focused impact. But it's not just those two strategies. There's also a third option. And that third option is called targeted universalism. Universal policies, policies that are universal in scope, but have targeted levers within them that are actually distinctly focused on addressing certain populations. And so when you're talking about disparities, whether that be disparities in infrastructure, whether that be disparities in terms of health, whether that be disparities in terms of funding, that you're actually looking at the lay of the land and you're coming up with a universal policy. So we're talking to bicyclists here. Universal policy might be a citywide transportation infrastructure that includes cycling. But the targeted levers is where is the infrastructure absent? Okay, wherever the infrastructure is absent, we're going to design a portion of the policy that actually addresses those areas, and et cetera, and on, and I'll get into this in more detail. So, in terms of creating, oh, I really can't read that. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so sorry. All right, let me try to do this from memory. So, in terms of creating a targeted universalism policy, you have to actually define your universal goal. And, and again, what is universal? Is it citywide? Is it statewide? Is it national? You have to actually, I don't know actually what else you have to do. Can somebody over there tell me what you have to do next? Is that the second line, or is that the second bullet in the first line? All right, okay. So you've got your universal goal. And then second, what you're doing is you're trying to assess where the difference is between the population and where the universal goal is. So in this case, it might be, you have the goal of bicycle infrastructure everywhere. You see that it's not everywhere. And then the third, what is the third thing there? Right. So, okay, it may be that your universal goal is infrastructure everywhere. It's not everywhere. But then you look explicitly to find exactly where the most need is, okay? So you're trying to find either the geographical areas or the population groups who need it the most. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. So, I am so sorry, but I perhaps need glasses. So with that, you want to know how far particular groups or areas diverge from the goal. So how much does the status of subgroups or sub-areas actually differ from the general population? And so you might find that in the lowest income areas that not only do they not have, that they not only have the infrastructure, but they also have the most traffic fatalities, et cetera, et cetera. And so you're really mapping out where the subpopulations are that have the most need. And once you do that, then you assess the barriers to achieving the goal for each of these subgroup areas. So you're going to use tools like focus groups and needs assessments and accessibility audits to try to determine how these particular populations are experiencing their disadvantage for the purpose of determining the nature of the solution. Then you're looking at crafting targeted approaches for each group to reach the universal goal. And so in this case, it might be extra resources that are dedicated to certain areas. It might be added incentives. It might be more information for certain populations. It might be prioritizing underserved areas in terms of prioritizing those areas first, focusing on where the need is greatest first before you roll out infrastructure in other areas. And then finally, adding your targeted approaches to a universal strategy. So, rolling out your universal approach for the entire city, for example, and then embedding those targeted strategies for the populations of most need. And so, and then you want to make sure that you're measuring the overall change for the community, but also the differences between the targeted and the general population. So is that clear? Is that clear that you can actually have universal policies that have targeted levers within them that get at pockets of disadvantage, and when you actually integrate the two, you can actually close health disparities. You can actually close transportation disparities. You can actually address disparities across a number of measures that are important. So, with that, now I'm over here. The targeted universalism approach actually requires that we're not only looking at policy differently, but we're actually looking at practice differently. It requires a different mindset. So the targeted universalism approach is inclusive, but it targets the marginalized, the underserved. It's conscious of issues such as race, class, and gender. It makes a connection to the social determinants, so you're not just focused on cycling, you're also focused on the economic and the cultural and the educational challenges facing certain communities. You're addressing geography of opportunity constraints, so you're looking at the geography of an area and figuring out how to get over those challenges where the most need is. You're prioritizing equity of outcomes, that in that vision you have for your outcomes, that you have equitable outcomes, and that's a priority. You are recognizing how people are differently situated, and you're in your policy making. How you engage in the policy-making process is actually participatory. Now, a quick little story. When the CDC gave out its communities putting prevention to work grants out a couple of years ago, I actually traveled to Chicago, and this woman told me, she said, we decided that we won the grant, and we decided that we're going to do one of our policies focusing on a smoke-free low-income housing. And she said, we went over to the low-income housing unit, and then lo and behold, they didn't want it. And they fought us tooth and nail the whole way. And so that is not a great strategy for actually developing policy. With you and your friends in a room determining what the priorities are and not engaging the populations that will be affected. And so participatory policymaking is very important. So, in terms of best practice for vision equity, now again, here I go. Best practice for vision equity is organizational diversity. Now, Andy has already talked about this, but being very clear about diverse hiring practices, ensuring equity of opportunity within the work environment. What do I mean by that? You look at certain organizations and you have occupational segregation. You see you see diversity in terms of admin and support roles, but not in terms of the professional staff or the leadership. So ensuring equity of opportunity within the work environment. Collaboration, establishing partnerships with diverse organizations and designing policy and program strategies in collaboration with diverse communities and partners. And then measurement, measuring progress and hiring practices, establishing process measures that ensure engagement with diverse stakeholders, and measuring impact of the targeted universalism policy approaches. So, I don't want to end on a sad note, but I do think that it's important that we realize, and I know that all of you do realize, how important the work you are doing is. And I am actually from San Antonio, Texas, and this is my timer, which is telling me that I'm actually out of time. But I'm almost done, I swear. But I went home one Christmas, and on the corner, around the corner from where my parents live, was this unusual shrine. It was literally a rock formation, and at the top was this picture. And this is a picture of a high school student. His name was Christian Lozano. And you can see he was born in 1992, and he died in 2008. So this was the Christmas of 2008. And his parents were just so devastated that they literally erected a shrine in their front yard. Literally. And it's still there to this day. Still there. And so I didn't know what happened. I asked my mother, and she said she didn't know what happened. But then slowly, I was listening and started to piece together what happened. And it turns out that Christian was walking to school one day, and I actually went and did a walking audit. I walked his route to school, and these are my pictures that I took. And so, you know, literally, he walked around. He only lived about 3/4 of a mile away from his high school. And so you walk around the corner from where his house is, and this is the road that Christian had to traverse. And you can see that Christian got to a certain point, and the sidewalk cut off. And I don't know what the conditions were on the day that he died, but I imagine that in rainy weather, that's mud and slippery. And you can see that the traffic is very, very heavy. And so on the day that I was there, they arrived, the truck guys, the city arrived to actually put up the sign, to put up the blinking light that says speed limit 30 miles per hour, school, beware. The day I arrived, they were putting that up. So that was brand new. And then you can see here where, you know, the traffic is heavy. And you see at the base of that light pole, the base of that light pole was a shrine that his colleagues at the school basically erected to him. And so I understand that you all are actually focusing on Vision Zero. And so what I am challenging you to do is to think about this as VIVO, Vision Equity plus Vision Zero. And when you do that, you're prioritizing, certainly, pedestrian and cyclist safety, and of course, reducing speed. You're focusing on vulnerable groups and communities, and you're considering all of the relevant factors, health, economic, education, cultural, all of the factors that are important for getting this right. Because literally, lives depend on us getting this right. And so I want to thank you. I really didn't expect that. Thank you. I know it's not my role to introduce Mayor Mick Cornett, but I have to say something about Mayor Mick Cornett. For the past 2 years, he has served on the advisory board of one of my programs, Leadership for Healthy Communities, which is a national program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. He is a phenomenal champion, and so it's very appropriate that you have him here. And literally, you're going to be captivated over the next several minutes with his story about how he made all of this work in Oklahoma City. But I want to publicly say thank you, Mayor Cornett, for your leadership, for being a champion on these issues, and for serving us at Leadership for Healthy Communities for the last 2 years. Thank you.
All right, so now you just gave my speech. So now we're even. Our final speaker of the evening is indeed Mick Cornett, the mayor of Oklahoma City. We had Tulsa folks kicking off the Women's Forum, now Oklahoma City for the summit. That's good. We're reaching America's heartland, clearly. Mayor Cornett is an athlete, a former TV presenter, a news anchor, a graduate of the University of Oklahoma, and at the tender age of 45 became the youngest mayor of Oklahoma City in decades. He has overseen the transformation of downtown Oklahoma City in recent years, somewhat confusingly for the policy wonks like us inside the Beltway, by way of two bond issues called MAPS 1 and MAPS 3. I'm not sure how MAP 21 fits into that scheme, but maybe that's where Senator Inhofe was inspired to come up with the name. Under his leadership, the city is rapidly becoming more walkable and more bicycle-friendly. And next year, Mayor Cornett will be president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Mayor Cornett.
Wow, what a great group. And I was still, when I walked in here, all I could think about was, why didn't I bring an umbrella to Washington? You know, you pack and you pack and you think and you think, and you spend all your time in Stephen Covey's, quadrant 2, and then you don't have an umbrella and you get rained on all afternoon in Washington. It is good to be back in the gridlock capital of America. We have, at the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National League of Cities, been dealing with a lot of the issues that I know are very, very important to you. And in Oklahoma City, we've had some level of success, partially because we had so far to go. How many of you have been to Oklahoma City before? Raise your hand. Okay, how many of you have not been to Oklahoma City and have no idea who I am? Hands just shoot up all over the place. He's the guy that didn't bring an umbrella. That's who that guy is. Well, Oklahoma City, it is important to note, I think, had its beginnings in the most unusual way imaginable. The federal government decided to hold a land run to begin Oklahoma City. So in April of 1889, they literally lined up settlers along this imaginary line and fired off a cannon, and the settlers roared across the countryside and put a stake in the ground. And wherever they put that stake, that was their new home. Can you imagine the calamity at the land office at the end of that day? Most parcels of land had multiple claimants. It was a disaster. At the end of that first day, the citizens got together and they elected a mayor. And then they shot him. Now, that's not funny. It does allow me to see what type of audience I'm dealing with, though. I appreciate the feedback. The 20th century was kind to Oklahoma City, but we had an economy that seemingly was always based on commodities. First it was the price of cotton, and then the price of wheat, and ultimately the price of oil and natural gas. But we were also a generation of entrepreneurs and inventors. For instance, did you know the shopping cart was invented in Oklahoma City? There's more. The parking meter was invented in Oklahoma City. You're welcome. Okay, so if you base your economy on commodities, what happens? Your economy goes up and down with the price of the commodity. And so you have these incredibly good times and incredibly bad times. And that was Oklahoma's story throughout the 20th century. And we were in one of those good times in the 1970s. You may recall, if you're as old as me, that there were gas lines. I know it's hard to imagine today, but people actually lined up to get gasoline, and there was this kind of national pessimism that the future of energy was going to be based on scarcity and that we were running out of oil. And of course, if you're in Oklahoma in that time frame, we seem to have plenty of it, and we thought the good times were going to last forever. And so our economy was roaring in the late 70s and into the early 80s. And then on one particular day, July 5th, 1982, it kind of all ended. We had a bank called Penn Square Bank, and Penn Square Bank failed. And before the decade of the 1980s ended, 100 banks failed in the state of Oklahoma. The banking industry took with it the energy industry, which took with it the commercial real estate industry, and you get the picture. 1983 was worse, 1984 was worse, 1985 was worse, 1986 was worse. Finally, it bottomed out in about 1987. But by then, we probably had the worst economy in the country. Okay, so about that time, the citizens of Oklahoma City elect this business-minded mayor who almost immediately goes off in search of economic development opportunities. And he puts together this incredible incentive package to lure United Airlines to build a maintenance facility in Oklahoma City. And so the state comes through with an incentive package. The mayor gets the citizens to pass a sales tax contingent on United Airlines building the facility for 3 years. A 3-year sales tax just basically to build this facility if they'll just bring the jobs. Now this is all to illustrate the level of desperation that has inflicted Oklahoma City and the leadership of the era. Well, on a now famous day in Oklahoma City history, United Airlines calls a press conference, and with everyone in Oklahoma on the edge of our seats, the United Airlines CEO says, we're going to build this facility in Indianapolis. And you could just kind of feel whatever air was left in Oklahoma just immediately went down into the toilet. But our mayor did a couple of very proactive things. The first thing he did was he insisted that United tell us where we went wrong, because we couldn't figure it out. We had this incredible incentive package on the table. And United didn't really want to talk about it. They wanted to talk about how courteous we were and how well prepared we were and how nice of people we were. And that was all good, but we really wanted to learn from this experience. And so finally, the CEO of United came clean. He disclosed that, unbeknownst to the people in Oklahoma City, they had sent in some mid-level managers and their spouses to spend a weekend in Oklahoma City and take a look around and then report back. And at the end of that little exercise, they had come to the conclusion at the board level that they could not imagine their employees living in Oklahoma City. Yeah, that was the kind of the kick in the teeth that the mayor needed to hear. We could no longer buy corporate America's allegiance. Now, I said the mayor did 2 proactive things. The second proactive thing he did was he flew to Indianapolis. Now, he did not move there. But at this stage of his political career, it had to seem pretty inviting. But what he saw in downtown Indianapolis was a city that had a nightlife. I mean, they had a canal running through downtown. They had hotels. They had restaurants. They had sports arenas and sports teams. And it all started to make sense. And some of them even have fans. It all started to make sense for our mayor. There had been a paradigm shift in America and economic development in general. We had been acting under the old paradigm that people would move to where the jobs were, and we were trying to create jobs. What had happened, and Indianapolis was one of those that figured it out first, was that people were going to live where they wanted to live, and jobs were going to where the people were. And that did not, yeah, well, go ahead and clap, because it is instinctual today, but I tell you, in 1987, this was breaking news for us in Oklahoma City. And so the mayor came back and he put together what we now know as MAPS. It was a penny on the dollar sales tax for 5 years, but it was all about improving the quality of life in Oklahoma City. And so it was a package of 9 items, things like a new sports arena, a new baseball stadium. He built a canal through an old brick warehouse district to create an entertainment district. This mayor even had the audacity to believe that we should put water in the river. Now, I know what you're thinking, especially if you come from a city like this, or perhaps most American cities where your river already has water. But I grew up in a city in which there was a big ditch downtown, and the grown-ups called it the river. And I remember looking in my geography books when I was in grade school, and I would see these massive rivers all over the world, and I think, this doesn't look anything like our river. The city of Oklahoma City had a line item in its budget to mow the river twice a year. The mayor's idea was to build dams to impound water. And so anyway, they go to the sales tax election in December of '93, and MAPS passes barely, 53%. Today, however, you can't find anyone that will admit they voted against it, because ultimately it would change everything. But it didn't change everything immediately. Almost as soon as the vote took place, there were controversies. MAPS was over budget. MAPS was behind schedule. Seemingly nothing was going right. Even the Citizen Advisory Board that had been appointed by the City Council to kind of oversee the projects were arguing amongst themselves, calling their own press conferences, not being respectful to the elected leaders. I mean, MAPS was a disaster for the next year or two. And then, in the light of this collapsing culture, we were struck with the largest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. A bomb goes off downtown. 168 people are murdered at 9 o'clock on a weekday morning. Now, I think it's important to kind of take a snapshot of Oklahoma City at this particular juncture, because this was a generation of people who had already been through the economic collapse of the 80s. They had been promised hope with United Airlines and had those hopes dashed. They had been offered hope with MAPS, but here it was a year or two after the vote, and nothing good was happening with MAPS. And now they had this emotional burden of a mass murder of epic proportions and the physical scar of the downtown cavity that had been created. But interesting to note what the citizens of Oklahoma City did this. And this is only something we've noticed in retrospect. We didn't really notice it at the time. But it's almost as if at this juncture in our city's history, the people of Oklahoma City grabbed hands, pulled each other up, and dared the world to pull us apart. There has been more unity in Oklahoma City in the now 20 years since the Oklahoma City bombing than any city in the country. And in the light of all that, some amazing things have happened from the leadership perspective. The next mayor came in and saw these improvements taking place in the inner city, but realized also that people weren't repopulating the inner city. People were going down there for a game or going down there to see a movie, but they weren't moving back to the inner city. And it took a city staffer at City Hall to turn to the mayor and tell this mayor what had to be acknowledged, and that was, I think his exact words were, "Mayor, you can pave these streets with gold, but until you do something about the schools, people aren't moving back to the inner city." And that was the sad truth. Our school district had bankrupted its political capital. The school board was not able to pass its bond issues. The school buildings themselves were crumbling before our eyes. Somebody did the math and said even if they pass every bond issue from here on out, they're never going to catch up. And so this mayor put together what he called MAPS for Kids, a 7-year penny-in-the-dollar sales tax to rebuild or refurbish all 75 buildings in the inner city school system, and to provide another $150 million into the suburban school districts. A complete round of capital for the inner city school system. Refurbished or all anew, an entirely new fleet of buses, a new round of technology, an entirely separate infrastructure, investments in 75 neighborhoods, in most of which hadn't had any new investment in a long, long time. Those implementation projects are going along. And then in 2004, in kind of a rare act of civil disobedience, the citizens elect me. Yeah. So I come into this culture with my illustrious predecessors having already done these incredible, important initiatives. And I'm starting to notice that for the first time I can remember, the city is starting to show up on these lists. Now, you know the list I'm talking about. These, the best city to do this, best city to do that. And magazines and websites love to rank cities. And all of a sudden, Oklahoma City is starting to emerge as a city to be reckoned with. Now, we weren't number one on any of these lists at this time, but we were at least on the list. We'd never been on a list before. But all of a sudden, best place to get a job, best place to start a business, best downtown, Oklahoma City. And so I was out speaking about it. I thought it validated all the investments that our city made. And I thought also, when I spoke nationally on it, it was a chance to draw positive attention to Oklahoma City. And so I was speaking about this list and that list. Couldn't wait for the next list to come out. And then it did. The list of the most obese cities in the country. Now, I like to point out that we were on that list with a lot of really cool places. Houston, Dallas, New Orleans, Atlanta, Miami. I mean, these are not cities that typically you're embarrassed to be associated with. And we weren't number one on the list, but we were pretty close. And I was embarrassed by it. And of course, the media comes up and puts a microphone in my face and wants me to explain it or defend it. I don't know what to say. And I realized, generally, when you're placed on a list that you don't want to be on, when you're on one of the negative lists, you'll see the leadership of the city, typically the business leaders or the political leaders, they will all try to attack the messenger or try to explain why the data was collected improperly, or it's misleading because there's all sorts of defense mechanisms that sprite up. I thought it was interesting in Oklahoma City, when we were placed on the list of the most obese cities in the country, we all kind of looked at each other and said, I bet that's right. I mean, I don't remember one person denying the probability that we should be on that list. And so I started kind of examining it and looking at it and trying to figure it out. And then I got on the scales. And I weighed at the time I think I weighed 218 pounds. And so I go to this government website and I type in my height and I type in my weight. And I push enter, and it comes back and says, obese. I thought, what a stupid website. I'm not obese. I would know if I was obese. And then I started getting honest and started looking at my kind of lifelong struggles with weight loss and obesity. And I realized I'd gone through this pattern where I would gain like 2 or 3 pounds a year, and then about every 10 years or so, I'd take off 20 or 30 pounds, and then I'd do it again. And as a result, I had this closet with an incredible amount of clothes. And I could only wear 1/3 of it at any one time, and I knew which third it was, and it all seemed so normal when I was going through this process. And so I thought, I got to lose some weight. I don't want to be the obese mayor in the most obese city in the country. And I also noticed that I wasn't gaining 2 or 3 pounds a year anymore. The first year I was mayor, I gained 10 pounds. And the second year I was mayor, I gained 10 pounds. And I thought, man, everybody wants to feed the mayor. And at this rate, if I'm mayor very long, I'm going to be a really big mayor. And so it wasn't hard for me to lose weight because I'd done it before. I just stopped eating as much. I'd been eating about 3,000 calories a day. I cut it to 2,000 calories a day. I'd always exercised, so that really wasn't part of the equation that I needed to worry about. But I had to eat less. I had to watch what I ate, and I had to eat less of it. And so the pounds come off. So I'm going through this process. I'm losing about 1 pound a week, and I continued that for about 40 weeks. And I'm losing, and I'm starting for the first time to kind of examine Oklahoma City and its culture for being overweight. And I realized we had built an incredible quality of life if you happen to be a car. But if you were a person, you were You were battling the automobile at every turn. We had these incredibly wide streets because when they designed them in 1889, they had to make them big enough for a horse and buggy to make a U-turn. And it never dawned on anyone, apparently, that they might need to be narrow. But now, and I say now, back in this particular point in our city's history, if you needed to cross a downtown street, you would hit the walk, don't walk sign, and it would say walk, and you would take one step, and it would start blinking. And then you start running, and before you know, you're jogging across the street. I mean, that was kind of the pedestrian friendliness of our city. We had this auto-centric lifestyle that had been so ingrained in Oklahoma City. Someone said, and I have no doubt it's true, that we were the fast food capital of the world. Most fast food restaurants per capita. I don't know who counted them, but I do know this. We have 45 Taco Bells, for instance, in Oklahoma City. I know. And I think it has a lot to do with the metrics. You know, land's cheap, and so their business model works really well. But when you built an entire city around cars, you have drive-through restaurants everywhere. And if we built a school, the most important aspect of that construction seemed to be how you were going to drop kids off in the cars. And so they'd have this big, long line for automobiles. Oh yeah, we might forget to build a sidewalk to connect the school with a neighborhood, but doggone it, we were going to have a great lane for cars to be able to drop kids off. We had built neighborhoods with libraries next to them, but it never seemed to dawn on anybody that we might need a sidewalk to connect all of these neighborhoods with these public entities. And so as a result, you pretty much had to have a car to survive in Oklahoma City. So in this culture, and I'm looking around at Oklahoma City, I realize that the first step we've got to take in Oklahoma City is we got to start talking about obesity. Because it was like the hush-hush subject. It was like we thought if we just ignore it, maybe it'll go away on its own. That didn't seem likely. And so I got with a buddy of mine who'd made some money in the healthcare industry, and he was at a time of his life when he wanted to give something back. And so he helped me create a website. And the website was thiscityisgoingonadiet.com. And on December 31st of 2007, I went to the zoo, and I stood in front of the elephants. And I said, this city is going on a diet, and we're going to lose 1 million pounds. Yeah, and that's when all hell broke loose. Oh, man. Yeah, it wasn't pretty. The national media, though, to their credit, there's two ways they could have gone with this. They could have decided this city is so fat, the mayor had to put them all on a diet. But fortunately, they took the other approach, and that is, look, this is a problem in a lot of places. This is a city that's actually trying to do something about it. Let's support them. And the national media support was incredible. I was on several national shows, you can imagine, into that time frame. And on one day, we had 150,000 visits to our website. The website also allowed people to track their weight loss. And so as people went on the website, along with the nutritional information we provided and information about a healthier lifestyle, we also asked people to weigh in. And as they lost weight, the counter on the website continued to count the weight. So we knew how many people were signing up and how much weight was being lost. And the weight was coming off in some pretty impressive numbers. And so 2008 comes along, 2009, the pounds are starting to come off. And I realized in kind of the wake of this kind of new culture that we had, where health was becoming a priority for really the first time anyone could remember, we had an opportunity when we started devising MAPS 3 to take advantage of this new health-conscious community. And so we started plugging in some infrastructure to start changing the built environment in Oklahoma City. And so in MAPS 3 and some related funding that came along about that same time period, I'm going to give you kind of a list of things that we have done. First of all, we have redesigned all of our downtown streets to be more pedestrian-friendly, more heavily landscaped, and we've narrowed them. And the amount of pedestrians that now on the streets is many-fold over what it used to be. We are building hundreds of miles of new sidewalks. Now, we're going back into the built environment, neighborhoods and retail corridors that were built back in the 60s and 70s. It's very expensive to go back and build sidewalks at that juncture because you got curb cuts and you got utility lines, but we're doing it because we feel like we've got to create an environment that takes the type of corridor like Maya was showing us, where the grass had been worn down by pedestrians, and build sidewalks for the people so they can easily commute between where they live and where they want to shop or where they go to school. We're building senior health and wellness centers throughout the community. You remember the river that didn't have any water? Well, the private sector started, with philanthropy, started investing in some boathouses, and today we have the finest venue in the world for the sports of canoe, kayak, and rowing. We're hosting the Olympic trials. We have a whitewater facility under construction now, and it's all taking place within 15 years of this river that had no water, and today it's the top draw in those sports for our national amateur athletes. Yeah. And our jogging and biking trail. Now, let me give you a background here a little bit. I was elected to city council in 2001 before I was mayor. And I remember we were at some budget meeting in those early years, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And so the parks director is up before the council, and he's explaining our bicycle trail master plan. And we'd gotten some federal money, and we were going to be building out in our master plan. And most of you have kind of been through this drill, so you can kind of picture it. And it was, we were moving the line, and I don't know, we were doing a mile or something of it. And so I raised my hand, time for questions, and I said to the parks director, at the rate we're going, when are we going to finish the bicycle trail master plan? And there was like this eerie silence. And I realized we were all going to be dead before we were going to finish the bicycle trail master plan. And so when it came time for MAPS 3, I called the parks director. I said, how much do you need to finish the bicycle trail master plan? And so we fully funded $40 million into MAPS 3 to fulfill that. We also, in our redesign of the streets, are building bike lanes. So whether or not people are using their bicycles for recreation on the trail system, and of course for health reasons too, or whether they're using it for transportation, which is more of the bike lanes in the street, we have a much friendlier aptitude for cyclists and people who are walking in our community. We are also building a downtown streetcar system with MAPS 3. We're building a downtown park. It's 70 acres in size. That, of course, it will have all the amenities of the healthy community that we're trying to transform ourselves into. And we're also, the typical economic development structures like a new convention center, some things like that are packaged into MAPS 3 as well. But in the wake of this kind of cultural shift that was taking place in Oklahoma City, finally in 2012, so 4 years and 3 weeks after we had launched the awareness campaign, we reached the £1 million goal. Yeah. And Rachel Ray asked us to come to New York and bring some of our more successful weight losers. And so I think we brought 7 people that had all lost over 100 pounds. Of course, these people had their lives changed, and they tell incredibly impressive stories on television. And you know how network stories love large weight loss stories. So, our people were front and center. But on that trip, I also did a round of New York media. And I found myself in downtown Manhattan the next day, and I was in to do an interview with Men's Fitness magazine. And as I walked into the lobby, it dawned on me, this was the magazine that had placed us on that list back in 2006. And so as I'm sitting down in the lobby and I look on the coffee table, I couldn't believe it. The new rankings were out. It said, America's fattest cities. Do you live in one? And I thought, oh, no. So, because I know I did, I picked up the magazine, and I look, and the way they do it, they take the 50 largest cities in the country, and the 25 that perform the poorest, they call the fattest list, And the 25 that perform the best, they call the fittest list. And so I immediately go to the list of the fattest cities in the country. And I'm looking, and I thought, well, I must have missed it. And I go back up, and I go back. And we weren't on it. And so excitedly, I turned the page, and we were on the list of the fittest cities in the country. I know. We were number 22 on the list. Now, how many of you, when you were growing up in your education, how many of you had to read The Grapes of Wrath? That is amazing to me. See, I always thought that was something we did in Oklahoma to ensure that our kids would feel bad about themselves. But as I travel the country and I ask people, how many have read, Steinbeck's great novel, The Grapes of Wrath, hands just shoot up. And okay, so let's examine that for a moment. This was a story about a very poor Oklahoma family in the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, and they put everything they have on a truck, and they get on Route 66 and they head west. And they're going to California for hope. They're going for a better future. And I was thinking about all of this and that generation when I saw the Census Bureau's latest statistics. And it looks as if we're in the wrath of grapes. It looks like the grandkids are coming back to Oklahoma City. The Census Bureau, which tracks relocation, shows we have more Californians moving to Oklahoma than vice versa. More Texans are moving to Oklahoma than vice versa. These are transformational shifts that are taking place in our community. A community that, remember, just 25 years ago perhaps had the worst economy in the country, and today could arguably have the best economy in the country. But it happened along the way because we realized the quality of the life of the citizens is at the highest level of economic development. And the idea that you could buy corporate America's allegiance and that you could create jobs in a vacuum and you could have a quality of life without the necessities of health and wellness were just completely mishit. But today, when you go to Oklahoma City, and I hope you will come see us, I think you're going to see a city that is energized, that is transformed, that has a completely new, rebuilt inner-city school system, has a population downtown that is growing by incredibly large numbers, and the downtown tourism industry, which had one struggling hotel 15 years ago, today has 12. And it is an amazing transformation. And I love telling that story. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. That was great. Thank you to all our speakers. And I have one final piece of business before I let you go. Immediately after this, if you head over the street to RFD, the Alliance for Biking and Walking Awards Party is going on, and it will be recognizing and celebrating the work of all the amazing local advocates that you are. And then one of the people you'll see there, and you'll hear there, is a young man that I met 22 years ago in Nottingham, or Nottingham, as you would say, in England, at the first of probably about 7,000 conferences that we've been to since then. Jeff Miller had just concluded, or was in the midst of some harebrained bicycling odyssey, riding around the world, learning about bike advocacy, and had managed to get a scholarship to do it. Where are you, Jeff? There you go. So, after many years translating that into a job leading the Bicycle Coalition of Maine, Jeff came to Washington, D.C. and headed up the Alliance for Biking and Walking. And he's been, since then, a friend, an ally, a confidant, a co-conspirator for many, many years. You know, he's a tireless champion of local advocacy leaders and organizations. And even though Jeff embodies many characteristics that terrify English people like me, he's big, he's loud, he's bouncy, he's brash, eternally optimistic and positive, something we just don't do. Jeff's moving on. He's leaving the Alliance at the end of the month, and we're going to miss you on K Street, Jeff, as you move on to the next chapter of your life. So good luck, and if you get a chance to go over to RFD this evening, give Jeff a hug. Look out, he's big, and he'll engulf you, but it's worth the experience. So thanks, Jeff. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Have a good evening, and we'll see you back here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.